people don't do the research, so they pick markets on a gut feeling. My wife's always wanted to go to Paris in spring, so we went to the French market.
Hello, Kathryn. How are you?
I'm good. It's still a little bit hot and sticky here in Austria, but that just means that summer hasn't finished yet.
Don't tell me about hot and sticky, because we know about that in Barcelona, unfortunately. So thank you very much for coming around Global Bonds. It is a pleasure to have an expert in export and import like yourself. So thank you very much for coming. Just for those of the audience who don't know about you, could you please very briefly introduce yourself?
Okay, I am originally from the UK. I still hold a UK passport, and I've been living in Austria now for the last, I'm going to say, 25 years. Before that, I was here also as an exchange student. So my background was that I studied languages at uni, and then had a year in Austria as part of that course, and found that this region is very strong in the export field. And after uni, I came back here for a year to do a course in international business and export, like a postgraduate certificate. And since that time, I've been working in export. So I started in various corporate roles, always working with fairly niche products. I started out with engine filters, then moved on to rubber stamps, of all things, before finally ending up in baby food, where I spent 18 years.
Wow.
And since 2019, I've been self-employed, working as an international sales and marketing consultant, and a coach and mentor to young export professionals.
Amazing. Yeah. And how was it that you decided to go for this field? Because you could have gotten into any other fields related, because I mean, if you studied languages, I mean, you've got like many other options as well. So what made you do the jump into this amazing field of export?
I don't really know what it was that attracted me to it. Honestly speaking, I thought it would be a way to use my languages. I knew I didn't want to teach. I thought it would be a way to use my languages and maybe to have some travel, and to meet lots of different nationalities, not just limited to the couple of languages that I speak, but also other people as well. And we'd had some kind of lecture on our induction when it was on my year abroad about how Austria is so strong in the field of export. And I thought, well, maybe it would give me the chance in the future to move back to Austria and to work for an exporting company. But I hadn't really understood properly what it meant to work in exports. I mean, in the 90s, it wasn't quite so typical to have internships and those kind of things. So I just took a chance that it would be the right thing for me, and luckily it was.
Interesting. And now that you're mentioning, because you started back in the 90s and then you've been like in the business for so long, what has changed in export? Because I reckon that, obviously the field has nothing to do. Especially because of globalization, like social media, internet, whatever. What has it changed in the export world back from the 90s to nowadays?
Oh, lots of things.
Yeah.
In my very first job, we did a lot of our export paperwork. We didn't actually have a PC in the export department. We only had a mainframe computer, so we could produce an invoice off our mainframe system, but all of the export paperwork had to be produced on a typewriter, which for anybody who's ever done letter of credit paperwork, you have to really make sure that every single document has the same structure, the same format. So if the original paperwork from the bank has a comma after the first line of the address, but not after any of the other lines, all of your export paperwork has to be exactly the same as that, which of course is really easy with a PC, which we did get like before I left that company. Like we had a PC a couple of years later, but for the first year or two, we were working with typewriters, faxes, and also when I went on my first business trips, of course, I didn't have a mobile phone. So
Wow. Yeah.
if I needed to call the office, then I had to, ask a customer nicely, or I had to book a call through the hotel to make an international call, which wasn't always that easy. And of course,
Yeah.
International calls home were just exorbitantly expensive. So you just didn't call home during a business trip. And I would say those kind of things, all to do with communication, like you say, these days, there's so many digital opportunities. Those are the things which have changed. I guess most industries are fairly similar, but it's actually those business trip type things where you say, okay, it makes a massive difference if you're away on a 2 or a 3 week business trip, if you can call home via the internet using Wi-Fi that doesn't cost you anything extra.
Yeah.
It's a huge increase in your quality of life as somebody who's
Yeah. And what about from the business's perspective? How are the challenges shifted from before to nowadays? Are they the same, or are some of them the same but now we have a new ones? I know it is like a big generalized question, but could you tell us a little bit about this? About the challenges, like from the business's perspective?
Yeah, I think it's become, of course, everything became a lot more speeded up. So with the digital age and the fact that basically it costs you almost nothing to send an email, whereas sending a fax, you would think twice about sending a fax. At least a small company would think twice about sending a fax, or sending a telex, heaven forbid. And so I think that for a lot of companies, accessing information about markets, accessing communication tools became much cheaper, meaning that export actually became possible for a wider range of companies. And smaller companies who in the past probably wouldn't have been able to take on the adventure, as it were, they suddenly were in a situation that actually they could afford to do it as long as they went about it in a, let's say, as long as they went about it in a smart way. I think that those are the main things. I mean, of course, everybody, I guess, has experienced the fact that emails these days, you have this kind of ping pong communication, and expectations in the whole business field changed, didn't they? That if somebody sends you an email, they expect an answer to it within,
Yeah.
a shorter period. They expect an answer within a shorter period of time than you're probably prepared to give the answer. And so I think it massively increased the levels of communication, but that communication is not necessarily always, it's not necessarily always constructive, or it's not necessarily always the best thing, because a lot of it is just, let's say, noise. And what I'm seeing, especially post-pandemic, is that a lot of companies have moved almost everything online, and they've gone away from doing in-person meetings, because they see that from a first glance cost perspective, it's much more cost effective to do meetings online. The accounts department can talk to accounts, marketing can talk to marketing, etc. So you can involve a lot of people in the process, the problem with it is that then they're struggling because the relationships are not as deep or they're not as nuanced as they were in the past. And of course, you get more communication difficulties. Firstly, when you've got a lot of people involved who are not necessarily international specialists, like the accounts department, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
And secondly, because it just is less easy to read people's body language and so on through a screen, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, definitely. And this topic that you're mentioning has popped up in some previous episodes as well. You know, the importance of face-to-face events, no, specifically in between different cultures, no. And now
yes.
we're going to get into this topic that I know that you are an expert in and you like a lot. What's going on with export and trust and cultures there? I mean, because obviously it's not the same doing business with Asia than with Brazil or Spain, for instance. So what's your take? Because I know that you are specialized in Asia, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. But I've done a lot of work with Eastern Europe, especially in the past. I mean, if you go back far enough, I also did a lot of work with Africa and also some with South America. But I would say Eastern Europe and Asia.
And Asia.
Yeah.
And what's your learnings? How to do proper business with them in terms of these that we are mentioning now, this body language and this importance of face-to-face events in order to build these long-lasting relationships, no? Just like adding another layer into the digital calls and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think layer is the right word because I tend to see it a little bit like an onion, you know, that when you first start working in a country, you have this idea as to what generally is the culture like. And those ideas are often based on a lot of cliches that have a certain truth to them because that's how they became the cliche, but they're not the whole truth and they're not the only truth that's available in that market. And I feel very much that as you go deeper into working with specific markets or with specific partners, then you start to see that maybe there are regional differences between the south and north of a country, be it the UK or be it Vietnam, for example. In the same way that you'd have East Coast, West Coast in the US, or maybe there's also not just the national culture, there's also the company culture. And of course, everybody's an individual. So at the end of the day, you know, it's that thing of, well, there's not a typical Spaniard and there's not a typical Brit and there's certainly no such thing as typical Chinese. But there are lots of variants. And I think that with time, you learn to read people. Of course, you can do some homework up front, but then once you're on the ground, you have to really focus on people and the relationships so that you treat each person as an individual and not just a generic Vietnamese or Argentinian customer, you know? I mean, I would say the general cultural information is great when it talks about how to go for dinner and whether to accept gifts and all those kind of basic politeness and etiquette questions. But the rest of it, you have to be empathetic and flexible as a person.
So by this, I understand that you are a big advocate of still face-to-face meetings.
Yeah, I think especially for Asia, nothing beats it. Nothing beats sitting down in the same room with somebody and best of all, having the time to not only discuss business, but also the time to have a meal together and really to get to know that person and to find out what makes them tick. Because That way, when you get into more difficult situations in a relationship, when something's gone wrong in the business, you've got a different foundation that you can use to have those difficult discussions. If you need to tell somebody that,
Yeah.
something isn't working out, it's easier to do with somebody that you have a good relationship with than with somebody that you've just had, 2 half-hour Zoom calls with, for example.
Yeah. Definitely. And although, I mean, now we're going to go back to the general thing. What do you reckon it could be like a good tip for a company, let's say, in these food and beverage um, field area or industry that they want to do business with Asia? What could be a tip that you could give them? Like two tips, like, okay, you will know your client or your partner there by spending time with them, blah 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 blah. But first and second, do not do this or do this.
Yeah. I would say for any food and beverage company who's never sold anything in Asia before now, that first of all, really think about which market is the right market for you. And for most European companies, I would usually suggest to them to start out in one of the smaller markets, like, for example, like Singapore, because it's simple. There's no problems with all of the regulatory questions. There's, everybody speaks English. You can submit all of your documentation in English. All of the laws are available in English, which is amazing, and there are other markets which are much bigger markets, which are great markets. But if you try and go into the Korean market or into the Chinese market as a complete Asian newbie, then it can be a very frustrating experience. And for sure, I would say, don't sign anything. Make sure that you meet your distribution partner before you make a final decision. Because, I mean, in the same as in all markets, there are a lot of people out there who cheat. And you do want to be sure that your business partner, your new business partner in a strange market that you don't know, that you are relying on for your brand reputation, you want to be sure that they really are the person that you think that they are, and that they can represent your brand values. Because let's just say it's quite easy on a 1 hour Zoom call, even if you have 2 or 3 of them, to present a really nice face to the world. Whereas if you actually spend a couple of days with somebody and, go and do store checks and have a couple of meals with them, it's very hard to hide your real character, if you like, over a longer period of time. And that's not just Asia, that's for any market.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And so how would you recommend someone to approach this selection of markets to start with? Because from a non-expert perspective, if I think of Asia, I would think precisely of like Japan, Korea, China. But you have just like said that they are the most difficult, which in fact it makes totally sense because language, culture, blah, like volume. No, it's like with Europe. No, we've got loads of like clients saying, okay, we're from the US saying, okay, we want to get into Europe and we're going to start with Germany. And I say, Germany, why? No, it's just because of the volume, of like potential business, and Germany and France, which are usually the ones that everybody wants to start with, are the most difficult in Europe to start with. Yeah. So how would you approach this market research, like market selection, in order to do like a successful export?
am I allowed to say something in, let's say, self-promotion? I have a downloadable,
Of course.
I have a downloadable ebook on this, precisely this topic.
So I would put the link on the description box. Thank you
Yes, I'll send you a link.
for your self promotion. This is why we are here, to self
Yeah,
promote. Yeah,
well, no.
good.
Let's say, I mean, there are a lot of factors that you can weigh up
Mm-hmm,
based on economic factors. It's the same factors pretty much for any market. You know, how difficult is the market entry based on the regulations? How expensive is the market to enter? What macro and microeconomic factors
mm-hmm,
actually play a role in your business? And you can do rankings and scorings and balanced scorecards
mm-hmm,
to work all of that out. There are also software opportunities and software solutions out there that will offer you like a market ranking report. So if anybody's interested in those kind of things, then they can contact me. That is also something that I have a partner who
mm-hmm.
offers.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
that's a relatively, I would say, because you can spend an awful lot of time, and I think that that is what companies often underestimate. They see that the time of their own staff, they don't estimate how much that costs them. If those
Mm-hmm,
people do a lot of internet market research, or if they go to chambers of commerce and all this kind of thing that can give you a lot of information, but maybe they don't have access to all of those databases.
mm-hmm,
Um, and sometimes it's better to say, I'm going to invest €2,000 and have a market ranking report on 5 countries. And it will tell me, specified to my brand or to my product category, let's say that way,
mm-hmm,
which one is likely to be most fruitful and where it's best for me to concentrate my efforts. You
mm-hmm,
know, based on how does social media look? How does the competition look? How are the retail channels? There are so many things that you can look at and investigate. You can really research yourself almost to death on the internet these days. But at some point, you have to make a decision. You have to start
yeah.
doing concrete research, don't you?
Mm-hmm, definitely. So I would, or you will be able to find the link in the description box. And we're talking about export of goods, but what about export of services? Is it the same? Like for a company that offers a service to export their services into another market? Have you touched this? Have you done this?
I would
What are the
say
differences? Is it
exporting
easier?
services, in some ways it's easier because you don't
Mm-hmm.
have all the hassle about paperwork and logistics
Yeah.
and so on. And probably because if you're exporting services, then probably you're going to get an online payment form of one kind or another from your
Mm-hmm.
partner. So from that perspective, a lot of the headache has been taken care of. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, there are always some like tax and legal topics that you have to be careful around as to what you're actually allowed to offer,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how you're allowed to offer it. But those are more connected with your home market rather than the export market, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you're looking to export services, the most important thing is really to get good localization of your materials if you're going to be talking to local companies and offering them local language solutions.
Mm-hmm.
If you're offering things as a very much, oh, I'm an international, I don't know, I'm an international marketing professional, I can offer you marketing support, and it's clear from the start that that's all going to be in English, then
Mm-hmm.
English language probably is enough, but you might need to change the way and adapt the way that you address and speak to your target audience because a German appreciates slightly different things in a presentation
Mm-hmm.
to, let's say, someone from Sicily or someone from Morocco.
Yeah.
It's Yeah.
Hmm.
Again, it's a
Yeah,
cultural thing. And the
yeah, it's a
school,
cultural thing. Yeah.
you know,
Sorry.
I mean, it's often a question of education. Like,
Hmm.
how are people educated to present ideas in their school systems?
Hmm.
If
Yeah,
you talk to
sure.
Americans, they want to just like tell me the essence of it, what's the conclusion, and then you can tell me the rest. And if I don't listen, then it doesn't really matter. If you talk to the French, who have that classical build-up of how an essay should be, you first of all do your idea, you then talk about the pros and cons, and at the end you have your conclusion. It's
Hmm.
yeah, it's quite a
Yeah,
cultural thing.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, the power of localization, and I'm not gonna get deep into this. And now that we have sort of like got into the topic, big question. And what are the common mistakes or pitfalls that you find most of the companies do when exporting into other markets? So it's like, okay, get ready to.
Probably number one is making assumptions about the market, or making assumptions that what works at home will work in exactly the same way in the target market. That isn't the case. And that pulls through pretty much every aspect of actually doing the business. So it could be, what are the payment terms with retail? It could be what kind of, if you're talking about electronic products, it begins with things like, what changes do I need to make to my product? Or food and beverage is the same. What changes do I need to make to my product in order to be able to sell it in the market that I've chosen?
Mhm.
People don't do the research, so they pick markets on a gut feeling. My wife's always wanted to go to Paris in spring, so we went to the French market. Or I've heard that you can play really good golf in Spain, so you know
Yeah, yeah,
let's
yeah, yeah.
find a distributor in Spain. All those kind of and it's easy. Everybody laughs when you say that, but at the end of the day, it happens in a surprising number of companies that they decide on markets or against markets because of those kind of reasons. And so I think the biggest takeaway is, don't assume things, and make sure that you have really an excellent strategic plan as to how you're going to approach your markets. And once you have the plan, go about finding the right partners or finding the right business model for you, and then working the market in a systematic way. Don't just assume that you've got a distribution partner, so he'll take care of everything for you. You need to guide, you need to be the one to take control of that process as to how you want your products to be presented in an overseas market. Because especially if you're a small company where you're maybe founder led, for sure you wouldn't just give anybody in your home market your baby and say, do what you like with my products, here it
Yeah.
is. But people do it with their export markets. So I would say those
Yeah.
are some of the main ones. And don't for the very beginning, don't give people terms of credit on the payments. Make sure you've got the money up front or
That's a
secure.
good. That's a good one. That's a good one. Precisely in another episode of this very third season, I was speaking with Jérôme, who is an expert in e-commerce, and he was saying that um, one of the big problems for cross-border e-commerce is that people like e-commerce owners, they do not treat international clients the way they treat their domestic clients, and that's the big problem,
Yeah.
when you neglect them because they're international, or and you don't localize enough, or you don't sell the things fast enough, or the customer service is not as good enough, so it is very in line with what you were saying, no? Because at the end of the day, international business is international business, no? It's just a question of trust, no? As you were saying.
Yes.
It's fun. It's fun.
And I
And
think especially for food and beverage companies,
mhm,
they also have to, in many parts of the world, they have to change their recipes, and they have to understand that if you sell products online, it's a little bit of
mhm,
one of my pet peeves, that people often assume that because they're selling a product online, then they can have clients everywhere. And I know that in the past, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of people used to buy, for example, electronics from the US
mhm,
into Europe, and then they would get upset when, at the point of import, the package would be stopped. And customs would say to them, okay, and you owe us now some money for tax and import duties and so on. And I think that that happens also with other products, that if products are non-conforming, not every country will let the product in if it doesn't conform to their local regulations.
mhm,
And I think that that is something that you shouldn't underestimate, because you don't want
mhm.
products. It ruins your reputation if a customer is upset because they've ordered a product and then the package is refused entry at the border when they've ordered online, or the whole container is refused at the border because there's a technical issue.
Yeah. Or the Incoterm or whatever is not properly written. Yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah,
Um, and talking about export and import, I think that we need to stop and talk a little bit about Brexit and the post-Brexit world in Europe. What's happening? Because I know loads, well, not loads, but some, well, a few companies that would, especially in the e-commerce, which is more my field, that they were doing business with the UK, and
hmm,
they were selling in the UK before Brexit, and they decided not to do anymore,
yeah.
because of precisely taxes and logistic craziness, whatever. What's your view from an export import expert like you on this? Not We're not going to get into politics, okay?
No, no, we're not
Uh,
going there. That boat has sailed. Um, I would say if you were looking to sell stuff into the UK post Brexit, then you have to really treat the UK in the same way that you would treat the US or you would treat any other overseas market, because that is effectively what it is.
mhm,
And especially in food and beverage, there are a lot of new regulations that have come in. At the moment, the product standards between the UK and the EU are pretty much the same, probably also because there's been a pandemic. And so the UK was, well, everybody was kind of uh, preoccupied with dealing with the pandemic. So the UK's laws haven't started to diverge too much from the EU up until now. But going forward, you can't assume that UK law and EU law will be the same.
mhm,
And because they're not part of the customs union anymore, you have to do customs paperwork. For most products, there's actually no customs duty which is due, but there is a cost for doing the customs processing. So
mhm,
even if somebody sends you a small package from the UK, or you
mhm,
send somebody a small package in the UK, I know of people where the grandparents have sent, the kids just something very small at Christmas that fits in a small envelope, things like advent calendars, those kind of things. Um, you have to pay a customs processing charge on those. And
yeah,
depending on who the carrier is, that processing charge might be quite a lot of money. So
Mm-hmm.
with the Austrian Post, for example, if something comes in, the charge starts at, I think, €5. But
Mm-hmm.
for the same size of package, if something comes in with UPS or DHL, it starts at 18 or €20. So
Wow.
if all that you're getting is a box of tea bags from your parents, like I did,
Yeah.
then suddenly it starts to get quite expensive compared to the value of the actual product inside. And I think that is the problem for e-commerce companies, especially, that
Mm-hmm.
often the product value is quite low of the individual package, and therefore the cost of doing this customs process gets really high compared to
Mm-hmm.
the value of the package itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have actually, like, experienced this firsthand. I've got some like friends slash family in London, and they would send me like, typical Christmas parcel with goodies inside, like candle, whatever. And
Mhm.
I was so shocked about. I think I had to pay like €25
Yep.
um, because of this that you were mentioning. And I was quite shocked, like, oh my God. And it's not that they didn't want to pay the postage. It is because of what you were saying, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not surprised then for e-commerce, like European e-commerce brands stopping into the
A lot.
UK. Yeah.
Yeah. In both directions. I
Especially,
mean, it goes both ways, right?
yeah, yeah.
It's also from the UK to the EU that lots of companies stopped. So on the one hand, it's more complicated because there's more paperwork involved.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, what I see a lot for food and beverage companies is the fact that the actual import export process takes much longer, because especially if you've got anything sensitive like seafood, meat, dairy, then you need veterinary certificates, because it's the same kind of certification that you would need for a market like the Emirates or
Yeah.
so on. So it's not quite the same. It is easier than that, but the process takes longer and it's more expensive because it's an administrative process and they cost a lot of money to administer.
Hmm.
So it's adding additional expenses um, into your situation.
Yeah. And now talking about what do you reckon are the KPIs or the key factors when you know that an export mission has been successful for a company? What do you reckon are, the key things to look at? Like, okay, I didn't have any returns, or what's what are those KPIs that are good for you to assess a an export
I mean, in the
mission?
food and beverage space, I would say
Yes.
it's definitely repeat orders, because
Mm-hmm.
usually you're looking at bigger volumes. Usually you're selling to an importer in the other market who's then selling into retail or to sub distributors who then sell into retail. So
Mm-hmm.
for sure, it's having repeat orders. It's seeing that those orders are gradually increasing. It's also often getting traffic or inquiries in via your website as to whether people can buy the product directly from you.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
Um, because they see it on the shelves, and they want to have it, but they think maybe they can get it. People are a bit weird about this kind of thing. They think maybe they can get it a bit cheaper, so they try all different kinds of channels. Or
Mm-hmm.
you start to get people coming to you. They see a little bit of success in their home market, and they say, "We could be your distributor. He's doing a really bad job." And you start to get lots of inquiries from people. And of course, in some situations, it might mean that the distributor is doing a really bad job, or it might mean that he's actually doing quite a good job. And so he's generating a lot of noise for the brand, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of an awareness. And that's also one to watch out for, that actually doesn't cost you anything,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, of course, you can go into doing market research and customer awareness and brand awareness and all of those kind of things that you can pay
Yeah.
unimaginable sums of money for. But right at the beginning, chances are you're going to be measuring KPIs like, am I getting new listings in the right supermarkets for me? And then am I listing more SKUs into those supermarkets? Is the product being sold off the shelf in those supermarkets? Or am
Mm-hmm.
I just getting a listing, putting the product on the shelf, and it's not actually being bought by consumers? Because in a big market like Brazil or in China, you can deliver in a hell of a lot of containers before the market shelves are full, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to make sure that the product is actually rotating off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really a key KPI at the beginning of any export project, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And do you have any success story that you could share with us, even if you don't mention the client, because I know that NDAs are big friends. That like that you could explain what was the problem and how you help the company export, and what was the actual solution provided.
I mean, a lot of the companies who come to me are actually looking for the same kind of thing. They're often looking for a good distribution partner in market XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
So my typical approach for that is to establish an ideal distribution partner profile with them, if
Mm-hmm.
because usually they're looking for distributor and not for any other like franchise or any other form of business. What's their ideal client look like? What are the kind of values that they're looking for? What are the key must-haves and nice-to-haves? And
Mm-hmm.
then I do a lot of internet research. So I'll start out by making a long list of maybe 15, 20, maybe even 30 distribution partners, depends on the market involved. If I have access to their overseas trade commissions, then I will ask them also for any advice, because they often have recommended distribution partners.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go into the phase of contacting all of those partners. So it might be by phone, it might be my email, sometimes trade shows. That would be also quite a good one if there's one that's at the right time and that's reasonable enough for me to go and visit.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, to get to the stage of having a list of 2 or 3 partners, after I've had lots of online meetings, if possible, to have 2 or 3 companies that they are also interested in working with the brand, and that then I can start involving the brand more actively, the brand owner, to say, okay, these are the 3 that I would shortlist. Let's have a
Mm-hmm.
meeting together. And then ideally that we would travel together to the market and meet with them on the ground and really
Mm-hmm.
look at them on the ground on a holistic level, so that you would go into stores where they're listing other products,
Mm-hmm.
see what some of their marketing activities look like, compare and contrast the answers that you've got. It happened to me one time, for example, on a visit with 3 companies shortlisted in Korea, and 2 of them in the course of the meetings said to me, we're the new exclusive partner of a very famous Scottish brand. I don't know, Walker's shortbread.
Yeah. 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 Sure. Yeah.
And I
It's
was
very
like,
nice.
yeah, I was like, interesting. 2 of you are the new, I mean, 2 of them are
Yeah.
telling me that they're the new exclusive guy. So obviously one was being
Yeah.
more flexible with the truth than the other. And so, you know, sometimes those kind of things are what makes the difference, because, a quick phone call answered the question as to
Yeah.
as to
But
that.
at the end of the day, the devil is in the details. So
Yes.
yeah, these little things, that can make or break a good partnership, no?
Yeah. You've
Um,
also, I mean, the brand owner themselves, whoever is going to be responsible for that market, they have to also be able to work well with that person or work well with that company. The chemistry between the two sides has to be at least on an acceptable level. It's no good if I just say, well, this is my best mate who does a really good job of distributing brands 1, 2, 3.
mhm.
But the brand owner that I'm now doing project for looks at them and thinks, well, I couldn't bear to go for lunch with them 3 times a year.
Yeah,
So, you can always tell those kind of partnerships are like, if you try and do it and you try and force it, then that is just destined to fail.
yeah, yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, I think it's more. Your job must be more about like matchmaking as well,
Yeah,
no?
yeah,
Like finding, like
yeah.
those all these little things, into
Mhm.
account, huh? Um, just to be finishing off, what's your take on the future of export import? What do you reckon? Obviously, I have to ask. I hate it about AI and all this technology happening. How is it gonna help us? Hopefully, what's the future gonna be like?
Um, it's an interesting question. I think that probably the first major steps forward that we'll start to see will be in the field of logistics. And actually, there are a lot of things going on in logistics, because logistics is one of those quite old-fashioned type businesses
Hmm.
that its basic structures haven't changed for the last, some of its basic structures haven't changed for the last 2 or 3 thousand years. I mean, like,
Hmm.
bills of lading existed back in the Roman times. And so, um, having those kind of things, and like having documentation that no longer needs to actually be processed with a physical stamp, but acceptance of things like electronic signatures. It sounds
Hmm.
like such a small step, but that would make a lot of difference in a lot of countries. It is possible within a lot of places in the EU, but for example, if you want to do business with Egypt or you want to do business with India, then things start to get more analog
Hmm.
again. And I think that things will be coming up there a lot more. I mean, of course, anything that requires brainstorming, AI, simulations, all the kind of marketing materials that I think will start to become a lot more AI supported.
Hmm.
Um, but I also do think that there are definite limits to that, and that it needs that human touch in the same way that a translation needs a human touch. You can do some basic work with a machine translation or with an AI solution, but at the end of the day, a human has to go over it and make sure it sounds like a human and not like a bot. Still, maybe things will change, but for now,
Hmm.
it has to be quite human based. And at the end of the day, business is done between people. And so that relationship aspect still has to remain, I think.
Hmm.
Um, however the paperwork develops. I mean, one of the things that would certainly be great would be being able to do automatic transcripts of like massively long meetings that you've been in, and that they would actually produce a good AI meeting report. But the problem is that from an export perspective, if you're in a country for 2 or 3 days, and you do some meetings in the karaoke, if you're in Asia, you do some meetings in the restaurant, then you go to a karaoke bar, then you've got all of these bits of the meeting that are not really formal meeting, but they're
Hmm.
maybe important discussions. And so getting away from having to do big handwritten, or not handwritten, but having
Yeah.
to do manual business reports would be great.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see how this goes. Um, I do completely agree, obviously, with you. The human in the loop still there.
Yeah.
We are humans. We need to build these long-lasting bonds in order to
Yes.
sell in other markets, and hopefully we will not be erased from the from from uh, from Earth by robots yet. We will see. So, Catherine, it's been super nice. Just to finish off the two typical questions. Is there something else that you want to add?
I'm good with
No?
that. No,
Yeah,
I'm good with
good.
that. Thank you.
Perfect. And typical questions. Question number one. Could you tell us a funny or not so funny situation that happened to you in your personal or professional life because of a culture clash or language drama? I'm sure that
Yeah.
you have loads of them.
Yeah, maybe two brief examples. One of them was a very much a linguistic example, and
Mm-hmm,
as a student, I was teaching in a grammar school in Austria, teaching English as an English assistant,
mm-hmm,
and there was a little girl at the back of I was in a class of 10-year-olds, like their first year of learning proper English, and this one little girl put her hand up and she gave an answer, but I didn't hear it.
mm-hmm,
And instead of saying what I would say now, which would be, please, could you repeat that louder?
mm-hmm.
I said to her, please, could you say it again? And she said it again, and I still didn't hear it. And I said to her again, once again, please. And at that point, she burst into tears because she was so convinced that she said the wrong thing.
Oh,
I was,
God.
yes, I was quite mortified at this. And she didn't speak the whole rest of the year in my class. She never said another word.
Oh, my God.
At least not to my questions. I mean, obviously she did speak, but not to my questions.
Not,
So she
uh-huh,
didn't volunteer any more information to me.
uh-huh. And why is that? Is it because of the culture or?
I think she was just very shy, and
Mm-hmm.
it was new school and everything was new, and
Oh,
yeah.
no.
So that was one that stayed with me, that if you don't hear somebody, that you ask them to speak louder, or and that saying, could you say that again a bit louder, is a more acceptable way of saying, maybe you made a mistake in that sentence.
Yeah,
Even if
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
did make a mistake in the sentence, it's often a more acceptable way of pointing it
Mm,
out. And the other story is more of an amusing, just a contrast, actually, in that when I very first started doing a lot of business in Asia, I was
mm-hmm,
also I was head of sales for quite well-known baby food company, and for their Eastern division, which meant that I was in charge of Eastern Europe as well as Asia. And
mm-hmm,
so you could go from one week being in Serbia, where at the time we had some quite intense discussions with our business partner,
mm-hmm.
and where it was perfectly acceptable in a business discussion to be almost shouting at each other and banging on the table and being, quite
Yeah, physical.
aggressive.
Yeah.
And then after that, you would just go for dinner and everything was fine. So then a week later, being somewhere in Asia where no conflicts were carried out in that way at all, and everything was very thought through and quiet and calm and contained, and you had to think very carefully and weigh each word before you actually expressed some form of disagreement, because you knew
Mm-hmm.
you had to disagree, but you had to think about how to do it without anybody at the table losing face. So yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that was
A
also
big
quite
contrast. Yeah.
it was quite a big contrast. It was quite a big learning curve to really like code switch between a lot of different cultures.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. So very interesting. And the very last one, if you would invite someone to the podcast, to my podcast, who can I go and say, hi, I would like you to come around? What do you reckon it could be a good guest related to international business or localization or export, import, brand?
So many people. How long do you want
Of
the list?
course.
How long do you want the list to be?
Just one, but
Just
just
one.
pick one. Just pick
Okay.
one.
I would say you should talk to Victoria Reynoldson, who
Okay.
is a leadership communication coach
Uh-huh. Okay.
and works a lot with international leaders who are starting, often they're starting out or they're ready to level up their leadership journey. And
Mm-hmm.
they're concerned that their English and their communication skills are not sufficient for this. So they come to
Mm.
Victoria.
Okay. Okay. So I'll reach out and say, hi, Victoria. Would you like to come? And I'm sure she would say yes. Hopefully.
I'm sure. I'm sure she would say yes.
Okay, Kathryn, it's been a super pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. And I hope the audience has learned a little bit more about export, import, what to do, what not to do, and what to take care into account when thinking about exporting goods to other countries. I would leave your contact details, your podcast as well, and your ebook in the description boxes. And
Yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to chat.